It's May 31st, 2008. I'm here with Kathleen Dickson. The FDA hearings. Can you tell me how that started?
Okay, so you're talking about the LYMErix vaccine and how it came on and off the market.
Yes.
Right? You want me to tell that story?
Yes.
Okay. In 1998, in December or so, the FDA approved LYMErix with numerous provisos. They really didn't have very much data. They claimed it was 76% safe and effective.
A vaccine to prevent Lyme disease?
Right, and you had 3 injections. So it was just a really terrible vaccine, but the FDA approved it.
And it made people sick.
Right. Well, yes, it did, but these adverse events during the vaccine trial were not reported. Excuse me, they were deliberately not reported by Yale University. The same thing went on with the Immunization vaccine trial, which ran at the same time. The OSPE patent for LYMErix is owned by Yale University, and the OSPE patent for Immunization is owned by CDC's Alan Barber. So the story of LYMErix is this. I didn't know anything about the vaccine. I had just gotten better myself after 3.5 months of intravenous antibiotics. I got 100% better in the fall of '97. So I decided to join Lyme activism because I felt like I had to get the word out. You know, this treatment really works, blah, blah, blah. You know, I got to help people because I got better after 9 years of it. So
What helped you?
3.5 months of intravenous ceftriaxone or Rocephin.
And that's
I got 100% better.
$12,000.
My total bill for that treatment was $108,000, including all the medical, assistance and so forth.
All right.
So a year later, in December of 1998, I had only had the support group for a year. The FDA approved LYMErix, so it came on the market in the spring of 1999. By then, I was getting sicker and sicker and sicker again. I had relapsed because Lyme is relapsing fever, and I went out of work in June of 1999.
And what did you do?
As a support group leader, I kept getting phone calls from
Where did you work?
Pfizer.
And what was your job?
I was an analytical methods development chemist.
So you'd know about medications?
Not really too much about medications, no. I'm not like a drug metabolism person or clinical or anything like that. Strictly analytical methods. The kind of methods to qualify drugs that you would find published in the United States Pharmacopoeia or the European Pharmacopoeias. In other words, you're a scientist in a different country, you take one of our jars or boxes of drugs and into your laboratory, and you want to assess whether or not each 100 milligram tablet actually has 100 milligrams in it, for example. It's a method. We develop methods to qualify our drugs, and they're published.
Uh-huh.
And I worked in a special testing and analytical development lab, so it wasn't just USP methods. It was a whole bunch of troubleshooting and all kinds of analytical problems for production and research, but production side.
So you were in a key position to explain to the FDA in technical terms what was wrong with a dangerous drug. All right. So
I was qualified to tell the FDA whether or not Yale and SmithKline had used a scientifically valid method to assess whether or not LYMErix prevented Lyme.
Okay. Explain the Karen Forshner connection. How did the group that started and talk about the testimony and what happened?
So the drug came on the market, was approved in 1998, December. It came on the market in the spring of 1999. I was getting too sick to work again because I had relapsed. And so I went out on long-term disability again from Pfizer in June in 1999. And during that spring, I kept hearing from LYMErix victims, and they all had the same story, whether or not they offered it originally or I had to dig it out of them. And most of this was inadvertent. I had no idea this was going on. It just kind of played out that way. Like 8 or 10 people had called me. They had Lyme disease before. They got treated. They got better. They got the LYMErix vaccine. Then they were saying they had Lyme again. I'm going, what do you mean? You got symptoms identical to Lyme after you got the vaccine? Yes. Oh, well, go see Sam Donta because, he's probably the expert. So I had referred them all to Sam Donta. And I went up, took a ride up to the Lyme Foundation in Hartford, that's lyme.org, and spoke with Karen Forshner of the Lyme Foundation. And I said, Karen, blah, 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 why are you advertising LYMErix on your website with all these injured people? And she didn't know anything about it. She her eyes bugged out of her head. She took a step toward me and she says, "You have to get these adverse events reported to the FDA." And I'm going, "Me? I got to do it? You know, how is this? How is the onus on me? Why do I have to do that? What are you talking about? You know, I didn't even know anything about the VAERS or the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System or anything like that." I'm like, "Okay, you know, so you want to report it? Okay." Then I called Dennis Parenti down at SmithKline in Philadelphia, and I said, who ran the SmithKline trial. He was the principal investigator, I think, or he ran it from the SmithKline end. I think the principal investigator was someone at Yale, or else Alan Steer for LYMErix. And I said, "Dr. Parenti, blah blah blah. What do we do with all these patients?" He goes, "Well, you have to have them report their adverse events to the FDA's VAERS." In other words, he seemed to me to be genuinely interested, and he gave me all the information I needed to help people, which was to print out the VAERS forms to hand them out at support groups, and also refer people online to the VAERS or the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System on the FDA's website. So we did that. We started the campaign. Action Line was founded a few months later in September of '99. And one of our goals, one of our action items, was to get all the adverse events reported to the FDA for LYMErix.
So you organized people that were sick.
We
with
organized
Lyme
a
disease.
national campaign to get everyone to report their LYMErix adverse events to the FDA.
You were the ringleader, and you brought.
Karen told me to do it. Dennis Parenti told me to do it. I'm just didn't even look at this stuff at that time. I just, oh, okay, I'll help.
So you were the first witness to testify in front of the FDA,
No. Again, in the summer of 1999, I went back up to visit with Karen, and I said, "Karen, in order to find out what's going on with LYMErix, we have to know what happened at Dearborn. How did we end up with this testing standard?"
Dearborn, Michigan.
Dearborn, Michigan, the Dearborn Conference. So Karen says to me, "Call the FDA and order the booklet." And I'm going, "Me? This is your shop, But I did. I ordered the booklet right then and there, picked up their phone at the Lyme Foundation, ordered the booklet. Karen and Tom Forshner paid for it. And I went back up there again and they gave me a copy of the CDC's Dearborn booklet. And I brought it home and I studied it. And I went, holy, none of these people agreed with Alan Steer at this so-called conference that they were all invited to participate in the proceedings. Karen gave me a whole bunch of data. She gave me 1994 FDA vaccine transcripts, vaccine meeting transcripts where Raymond Datweiler says the way to assess these vaccines is to perform serial Western blots. We found out that was the old standard. She gave me a copy of that. She gave me a copy of the Dearborn invitation. So I took all this stuff home and I studied it and I said, "This is bogus. This is not how you do science."
After the hearing, LYMErix was taken off the market, a dangerous drug, and you were to blame, correct?
Well, so after we found out that the testing for Lyme was a deliberate fraud, at the same time that we started a national campaign to get adverse events reported, a year later, in the fall of 2000, the FDA granted us a hearing on all the adverse events. So we went down there in January of '01. And I, as the Action Lyme, group leader, had selected people who I knew about their adverse events so that every type of adverse events type was represented to the FDA vaccine committee so we could cover all the adverse events that were not reported to the FDA during the vaccine trials that should have been. It was a big deal. Steve Scheller was there. David Weld was there, one of the Weld brothers, William Weld, David Weld. Everybody was there. Edward McSweeney was there in the background. So we had strategically arranged that the FDA vaccine committee would hear all about all of the different kinds of adverse events.
Yeah.
And so at the closure of the meeting, it was left that we thought the FDA would hopefully not approve the vaccine for children, and that there would be a label on it put on the vaccine such that at the very least people who are prone to Alan Steer's autoimmune arthritis in the knee would be warned against getting this vaccine. That was Steve Scheller's reason for his class action against SmithKline. And Scheller is Scheller.com, Scheller, Steve Scheller. So soon thereafter, after January of '01, a few months later, I think in the fall of '01, Karen Forshner of the Lyme Disease Foundation found a patent by Tufts, Tufts, in which Denise Huber explains right in the abstract of the patent that they have a new type of spied vaccine that's going to be not as toxic as LYMErix. So Karen Forster found out. She zooms down to the FDA, presents to them this patent, which says LYMErix is a toxin. It's a super antigen. It binds the HLA molecule in certain types of people who have Lyme. That is only the Alan Steer kind of Lyme, which is the only kind of Lyme you can have. In other words, Alan Steer proposed you can only have Lyme disease if you have an autoimmune arthritis in the knee in response to OSPE, the vaccine.
The vaccine could be shown as working if they don't show all the types of Lyme.
Well, yes, they threw out, all, as I explained to the FDA vaccine committee, and my testimony's on their website still, they threw out all of the so-called unconfirmed Lyme cases. So they threw out bad data. They threw out data that proved that LYMErix did not work.
They cooked the books.
Yes, they did. They narrowed the definition of Lyme, and they practically said nobody can have it. So then, if nobody can have Lyme, then nobody's going to have LYMErix failure, Lyme vaccine failure.
Let's talk about money. How much did you cost?
I want to finish the story about Karen and the patent. So Karen Forstner, in early February of 2002, I think, flew down to the FDA with this Tufts patent, proving that Tufts knew that LYMErix was a toxin for certain people. And the FDA gave SmithKline an ultimatum, and they said, either you pull this vaccine off the market or we will. And then on February 26, 2002, it was removed from the market.
How much money did you cost Yale and SmithKline? GlaxoSmithKline, Beecham?
SmithKline, or GlaxoSmithKline, SmithKline at the time,
yeah,
had invested $200 million in the development of this vaccine. Yale had intended to get royalties from vaccination. Now, this was a vaccine where everyone was to be vaccinated every year.
Of the whole country?
Yeah. Every year you were supposed to get a LYMErix vaccination. So they intended to make millions of dollars per year in royalties.
They could have harmed the whole country.
Well, they didn't care because the bottom line is the bottom line. Yale is not a research institute.
They wanted to harm the whole country. They didn't want to harm. They didn't care. They just make the money.
They're a corporation, and they wanted free tax dollars to invest in their new products. Everybody else has to go to the bank if they want a business loan, but we were paying for that free stuff, and we were also paying to be abused. Yes, it was the most ridiculous thing. You
cost the bad guys, what, $1 billion? Explain that in grants.
I've never even thought about how much I cost them. I just know that SmithKline had invested $200 million in a vaccine that they knew didn't work.
Well, did Yale not get...
They didn't get their royalties. They did not get their monopoly on national blood testing. They didn't get any of the things that they had hoped to get. In fact, they missed out on $1 billion worth of grants in the past year. The NIH gave out $400 million worth of grants with the specific intent that they would find actual treatments now for all the money. Senator Grassley was furious. Yale and that cabal got squat. And just recently...
What about the other $600 million? You said
just recently, Howard Hughes Foundation gave out $600 million worth of grants. And this cabal, again, got squat. So in the past 9 months, there were $1 billion worth of research dollars given out with the specific purpose of finding treatments for illnesses, and none of it went to Yale because they had already realized how much they had wasted with those people. You
took $1 billion out of somebody's pocket.
I wouldn't go that far, but I'm sure they're furious.
All right, so they were after you. This is, after you testified.
There's no question that Edward McSwiggan at the NIH was after me, and probably Derlin Fish too, yeah.
And the NIH is what stands for what?
National Institutes of Health.
And so he was after you, so you were under surveillance by the police, or your kids were taken.
I mean, after LYMErix came off the market, we were looking for a law firm to sue Yale in a class action, and we had a family reunion, the Vosslers, down in Penfield Beach, and my cousin Christopher is a lawyer. What? We were looking for a law firm to sue. My sister filed false allegations to the DCF because she knew I was the whistleblower, and that made her crazy. What?
Oh, what I wanted to say is there's a cause and effect. You took a
Well, it was a gangbang because I'm the whistleblower.
So they encouraged others to make false statements against you.
I don't know that. I mean, my family are, none of them there. There's nobody there in my family who was very bright. I mean, they're all kind of like impaired. They're either thought disordered or just plain kind of like on the edge of mentally retarded. I'm the only one who was even remotely intelligent in the entire family besides my father. And so, in the way that they compensate for their lack of cognitive abilities is to just be evil. That's my family. I just grew up with people like that. They're just crazy and weird. Mm-hmm. They're jealous. That's the bottom line. Everybody tells me that they're just jealous, and it's like, that's always been the case. But I claim that, if you want to be an intelligent person, then don't spend all your time conspiring against people and inventing for them the things that they said and did. That's one way to be smart. Pick up a book instead of, inventing for people what they did and said.
All right. All right. You're never in trouble. You never had a criminal record.
Nope, not even a speeding ticket ever.
And then after having taken a dangerous drug off the market, you end up having your kids taken away. You get locked up in a mental hospital.
In jail for 4 months, yep.
And they didn't tell you what you were in for.
In the first 7 weeks I was in jail, I had no idea why I was arrested. That's true. I did not know. I was not allowed to know what the charges were against me. Nobody would tell me why I was in jail.
And Lisa,
totally false criminal charges. Completely false criminal charges.
And they did the same thing to Lisa Masterson.
They did the same exact thing to
London.
Lisa Masterson in London. And yes, Edward McSwiggan was central to that. Yes. NIH's employee, Edward McSwiggan, was involved in the bag jobs of myself and Lisa Masterson, yes.
The Department of Administrative Services in Connecticut, they're a domestic spy organization with the state police. I mean, if they spy on you, among others, and then they spy on Lisa Masterson, and then this stuff happens after the fact, it shows that there's cause and effect. There's bagmen for Yale and for the other bad guys.
Well, the Department of Administrative Services, or the DAS.gov, is an entity that gives out state contracts. I have no idea why that entity was giving Lisa Masterson's website on me all these hits. I have no idea. I have no idea for whom they think they're working, whether they're independent little creeps spending their work time being little paranoid nerds or what. I do know that the Department of Administrative Services gave out some contracts to a Laura Lustig, Lustig, who was central to my bag job because I had given her my complaints to the Commission on Human Rights and statewide bar council, and somehow they found their way into the hands of Yale's Patricia Liebens, who wrote a fraudulent temporary order of custody of my children, never mentioning that she was looking at these things. And this Laura Lustig is, a lowlife. She pretends to be a psychologist and advertises on her website that she is an expert in people with cognitive
What's her relationship to the state of Connecticut?
She has a contract to train the DCF hoes to be lying hoes. And she also provides psychological evaluations for the state, which is a conflict of interest. Her second in command, a Mark Marcus, was a former DCF commissioner. So that's probably a violation of the state's revolving door policy. So Laura Lustig would have an interest in my bag job because she probably is a criminal. She probably could be indicted for defrauding the state.
Well,
conflict of interest.
So yeah,
she beat the revolving door policy. Once I made that information about her and Mark Marcus known to the public, she removed Mark Marcus from her website.
So
she used to have his bio on her website.
You're organizing people that were sick with Lyme, because of a dangerous drug. I mean, people were liable for harming people, and you expose it, and then you find other people that are likewise abused, sick. You get them to testify to the FDA, and your whole life was just, and your family.
Right, I thought I was helping people. I was sick with Lyme disease for years. I had given it to my two children. Both of my first two children had tested positive.
Means
yes.
that you were pregnant and it was in your bloodstream.
Spirochetes passed through the placenta. This is well documented. At Yale University performed an autopsy on a child who died of congenital Lyme brain damage, so there is no doubt that this happens. The same thing happens in congenital syphilis. I was very sick from Lyme. I had gotten 100% better from this IV treatment. I became a more active Lyme activist. Started the first support group in this county where Lyme is, if you can believe it. There wasn't one here in '97. And I was just taking calls mostly and trying to get a treatment again for myself and assure a good outcome for my children, because I was horrified that they might have the same disease that I have and could be treated the same way with denial of your illness. And God only knows what. Karen Forstner's son died from it. I was afraid because I had one kid who was kind of sick from it, and she ends up testing positive for ehrlichiosis too. The other two seem to be fine, but the middle one is sick.
All right. Let's see what that is.